Well, welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here with three of my good friends, Julie, Rebecca, and Phil, who are all volunteers in the chapel and who help run things and without whom the chapel wouldn't be. And so I'm very grateful to all of them. I'll start there. And I love them all very much. For anyone who's watching, in case you're curious. And we're going to chat today about our community life, about how we came to it, why we found ourselves here, what it means to us, and all those sorts of things. And if it's okay, maybe I'll pass it over to Rebecca if you wanna start. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Justin. So I joined the virtual chapel in 2020 during the pandemic. Actually, somebody joined me to the Facebook group, and I didn't pay attention for a long time. But at the same time, I was actually seeking for virtual community. My own church was not, I mean, they were holding YouTube church, but it didn't feel like community because it was YouTube. So I had been searching separately and not paying attention to the virtual chapel because I just wasn't paying attention. And then I did see at some point, oh, they have chapel sessions. It took me a while to go because my own background, I tend to not be a fit for many spiritual communities. And while I was looking for something with a Christian flavor, I needed to be sure it was a place where I could be safe to express my own version of Christianity with everything else that I bring to it and the other traditions that I've spent time in. And so I saw that there was this chapel happening, but it took probably 6 months of being aware that these sessions were happening before I joined. When I finally joined one, it was a Saturday morning. Instantly, I understood these chapel sessions, the Zoom chapel sessions are where it's all happening. There's a Facebook group and people post and comment, but where it's really happening is in this community of people who comes together throughout the weekend to observe holidays and this and that, and grows into real community. So even though it was virtual, I now feel that I have brothers and sisters who are diverse from me in their spirituality, but who all bring something unique, who make space for mine, and who give opportunities for me to grow spiritually and be nourished. And so that's how I ended up here. And that was it was the end of 2020 when I joined my first session. So it's about going on 5 years now, and I'm happy for it.
And I've known you since then, and I didn't know that story. For me, the way I found this is that I was part of what turned out to be a 1 year Zoom group for the Center of Action and Contemplation. And when that year ended, lots of us who were seekers within that community were then looking for other places. And this was one of the ones that was recommended to me. I believe this was in 2019, prior to the pandemic. And like Rebecca, just instantly found a safe space to be my own spiritual eclectic self. And because I'm fringe to a lot of kind of traditional spaces. And I am a deep seeker, a deep thinker, want to drink from a deep well. And that is influenced by a whole variety of faith traditions, grounded in Christianity, but with tendrils kind of all over. Um, and the more I learn about other traditions, the more it deepens my own faith and understanding of Christianity. So, um, and I can't do it by myself, right? So I can have these deep thoughts, but when I speak something, then somebody else in the group will offer up something that they're thinking about. And then somebody else will offer up another thought. And together, it's this really synergistic effect where we all, again, in our own way, come to a deeper understanding of something that wasn't possible except for community. And when you're kind of flirting around the edges of faith traditions and don't really know how to find it in traditional ways, this was like a breath of fresh air. And it really has fed me over the years. I mean, look back on it now, and it's been not quite 6 years. I can't believe that it's probably 5.5-ish. And that's a long time to be with people. And yet, that what I felt was immediate and it's only deepened over time. So the people within this group are, even if it's the first time they join, you can tell by their reflections that find deep resonance and that it's a place where they can bring their full spiritual seeking, questioning, exploring selves to.
Yeah, my story is somewhat similar to Rebecca's in that had it not been for the pandemic, I would probably not have stumbled on the chapel when I did, which was actually the summer of 2021. Now, my church, similar to Rebecca's, had, the year before when the pandemic struck, we went to all Zoom services. And although we were slowly beginning to get back into community in 2021, I really wasn't ready to go back out into the wide world. And I saw one day a mutual friend, I guess, of mine and Justin's had posted a link to the chapel on Facebook. And I thought, well, I was missing, real community with my local church. I'll give it a try. And to my amazement, I walked into the first meeting, and I think mine was a Monday. And it was like, I felt instantly at home. Karen, another of our volunteers, was leading, and we had a connection right away, just because she's originally from Scotland, and I lived in Scotland for many years. And it was like, hey, I think these people are my tribe. This is where I fit. Now, my spiritual background, it has been Christian but eclectic. I was born and christened in the Church of England as an infant, joined the Scottish Episcopal Church when my family moved to Scotland. Yeah, went away from Christianity at the age of 15 because my parents said I was bored of going to church. My parents said, just get confirmed and you don't have to go to church anymore. Great. So gave up church, had an awful adolescence, the details of which I won't bore you with, but it was pretty horrific. And I was a solitary child or solitary adolescent going for long walks, felt there was a larger life, but I couldn't reconcile that with Christian spirituality. Went up to university at the age of 18, and my best friend at university turned out to be a Christian and who liked the same kind of music that I liked. So he invited me to some Bible studies, and I went along. And the summer after that, summer 1980, something about these guys, I really liked it. And so over that summer, I made a profession of faith, not the blinding flash of conversion, but I thought, I want to be this. I want to have what these people have. And that led me into sort of very evangelical Christianity, black and white. You believe on the Lord Jesus and you're saved, and if you're not, well, you're going to the other place, sort of thing. Various things went on after that. I again had move away from that kind of faith, which anyway led to a certain amount of catastrophe in my life, which in turn led me back to faith, but this time of a charismatic flavor. And one thing I'll say about charismatic church, they were the first people to teach me that God was to be experienced in the here and now. Fine. What was limiting about charismatic church, which I spent about 15 years in altogether, was that they still wanted to put God in the theological box of, you know, traditional evangelical Protestantism. And to my mind, that was a contradiction. Looking back, I see there was an inherent contradiction there, because either God is beyond our comprehension, or we have to put him in a field, or put them or he or us or whatever pronoun you want to name God with into a theological box. And I got to the point where I didn't want to put God into a theological box anymore. Along a series of circumstances, including meeting my wife to be, moving to the US to marry my wife to be, settling in the US, led us eventually back to the Episcopal Church, where I've been a member of my local Episcopal Church for the last 20 years. And then, of course, pandemic, things shut down, and I suddenly, you know, along in the Episcopal Church, I discovered Richard Rohr and the daily meditations from CAC. And I was hungering for something more mystical anyway. I'd been interested in mysticism in Christianity probably since the 80s, when I studied some of the medieval mystics as part of being a student of medieval history. And I was interested in the Celtic Church because I'd grown up in Scotland and spent time in Wales, and I'd been to Iona, and I was familiar with culture to a certain extent. And also, so a lot of what the chapel had was very, very attractive to me. And since I've come, you know, I've become a volunteer. I love all of you, even though I've only ever met Justin in person. I mean, I feel that I know both you, Rebecca, and Julie as good friends, even though we've never met, although I hope we'll be having that opportunity at some point in the future. But it doesn't matter, because we are all here and we are all beloved of God. And one thing I love about the chapel is that it really cherishes the diversity of the divine experience, and we welcome everyone, whatever your gender, your orientation, your class, your how you appear on the screen. Everyone is welcome, and your spiritual experience is absolutely valid. Whatever you are of a journey, we're a home for you where you can come, and we are a safe space. Our meetings at times can be quite raw, honest. People can have strong emotional reactions to some of the stuff we share, and that's okay. This is a safe place. It doesn't go beyond the chapel. So, yeah, I want anybody watching this who's feeling hungry for more, who's dissatisfied with a narrow spirituality, we could be a home for you. Why not come and try us out?
Yeah, well, thank you all. I mean, my journey is different but similar in many ways to the chapel. I grew up Quaker, and Quakers in Canada are very liberal and very multi's the wrong word, interspiritual. And so I grew up Quaker, but also a little bit Wiccan, and some of my other Quaker friends were also Buddhist and stuff like that. And Quakerism for me at that point in my life was not really even a Christian thing. And my Quaker friends that I went to youth groups and summer camps, I went to all the Quaker stuff. They wouldn't have really, and still don't consider themselves Christians. And so I got a foundation that is Christian at its core, because the Quaker tradition, its roots are definitely Christian, and all of our language is very Christian when we talk about the light and all that. But I hadn't even really read the Bible until I was an adult, or I hadn't at all. Um, and I also grew up going to ceremony, indigenous ceremony, mostly Ojibwe. When I was younger, some Algonquin, and um, later on, I spent time with a Dakota UEP man for a while as his helper. Um, so I got a lot of really broad experience in ceremony, and went to my first wet when I was 12 because my mom was a hippie and took me to those sorts of things. Um, and then at some point I dove into it even deeper. Like it was always part of my life as a teenager and stuff, a little bit. But in my early 20s, I just went full throttle into ceremony as much as I could. Went to every ceremony I could and traveled all over the place, and did that for like almost 10 years. Um, and had that formation and spent a lot of time learning from a wide range of elders. And eventually, we don't have time for me to share the story of how, but I found myself preaching at a small country church out in the middle of nowhere on Manitoulin where I was living. Um, they couldn't find anyone because it was too remote, and they couldn't even find someone. The congregation was older, and they were hard up even just for local people to supply preach. And so they just cold called me and said, "Do you want to be a preacher?" And I said, "I guess." Didn't even really think of myself too much as a Christian. And I would go to church sometimes, but I was also going to ceremony, and I was also studying Hindu stuff at school. I got an undergrad in religious studies, just a simple one. Um, and then I was in the United Church, which is a mainline Protestant church in Canada, very liberal, um, very inclusive, very social justice oriented. And those are the reasons I was there. But it's also not a mystical tradition. It's very much a hands on the ground social justice. Mysticism is a selfish waste of time kind of narrative a lot of the time. And so I didn't fit very well in that regard, because I'm very much a mystical kind of person. And I had spent all that time in ceremony. And I thought when I got to seminary foolishly that they were not the same, but that there would be some kind of sort of more than I had found locally in church that would be the deeper stuff. And I didn't find it until I was doing some sermon prep for Easter, and I stumbled across a Richard Rohr sermon on YouTube about Easter. And I was like, "Oh, dip, this guy's talking about the stuff that I thought I was going to find and didn't." And I watched everything I could of him on YouTube, and some of them I watched like 10 times over or listened to them as I was doing stuff, and just like internalized Richard Rohr to a huge degree for a couple of years. Um, and I, during that time, left the church, left seminary. I had a congregation for a year and a half, 2 years almost, which I left after Lent. I had gone to a Jesuit retreat center just on my own. I rented a room and prayed in the chapel and spent a weekend there just to sort of recuperate after Holy Week. And I was praying, chanting in the chapel. And I, I decided to kind of stick with it for a while. So I've been chanting for about an hour, and all of a sudden I burst into tears, and I just realized that I had to leave the church and I had to leave seminary, and that there was some other path. And it wasn't an easy path because I went back to Manitoulin where there's no good work. So I worked at a call center, which was not great for me, and I didn't flourish, as no one does in a call center. So as I was there, I started just seeing what I could do with my old sermons online, started a website, used my old sermons as blog posts, just into seeing who else in the world might be interested in doing that kind of stuff. And my girlfriend, who was new at the time and is now the mother of my 2-year-old son, was like, "I don't know what I'm going to do next after I leave the church." And she's like, "Well, you could just be like Richard Rohr." I was like, "Oh, well, maybe not Richard Rohr, but like I could maybe try and do something along those lines of, being that side of Christianity and teaching and writing and that kind of stuff." And so I did that on the side as I worked at the call center, and then switched from the call center to the restaurant and worked there for a while. And then my health, my back, I have just my spine is wrong, and so I have multiple pinched nerves all up and down my spine. I have sciatica on both legs. It's like sciatica in my whole body, plus a bunch of other crappy symptoms that really suck. And so I was housebound, not quite bedbound, but housebound essentially for a while, a year before COVID hit, and then COVID hit. So I had this sort of forced hermit life, which was not the life that I lived previously. I was very much a nomad wanderer. I was always going everywhere, all the places, and doing different things. And all of a sudden, I had to just stay at home and figure out what to do. So I started to buy some of the books I heard Richard Rohr talking about. I got The Cloud of Unknowing, and I got different things, and I started reading them, and one thing led to another, and my library grew. I'm looking at my bookshelves. It kept growing, and I kept reading, and then COVID ended, or whatever, the lockdown stopped, and during the COVID time, because I had set up the chapel before COVID, everybody, like you guys all just said, were able to be like, this is better than church on YouTube, because we had already sort of run it and practiced and tried and seen what would work. And Karen, especially, I don't even know how long I've known Karen now. It's hearing you, Julie, say it's almost 6 years. I was like, oh my gosh, like as if.
I know.
And Karen was one of the people like right at the
Mhm.
very beginning. Anyway, so now I've been able to transition to this, partially with the help of all of you lovely people who support me and keep this community running, and a place where I'm nourished and fed, and yeah, it's like my dream job. So thank you.
Justin, can I pick up on a couple of things you said
For sure.
briefly? One of them is mysticism. And for me, that was very important. My background is different than yours, but it involves multiple traditions. And within me, this was never a problem because from the mystical perspective, God just appears as God appears and doesn't fit in boxes. And so and mysticism was a thread through all of it. So my upbringing was Jewish. I spent quite a lot of time in an ashram practicing a form of Hinduism, and eventually was on the Christian path and became Catholic. But the thread of all of it was mysticism. And one of the things I was looking for when I was looking for community is a place where mysticism was central. So I have also progressive values, et cetera. But I also had had some experiences like you, Justin, where maybe so much emphasis on the outward social justice work I felt like there wasn't necessarily space for me to express kind of the inner experience and how that informs the outer work. And I felt it immediately when I came to the chapel. I have developed like a list of buzzwords that I kind of look for to see if I'm in among my people. And you named several of them, and the cloud of unknowing is one, Richard Rohr is one. And so I came to the chapel and like 6 of my buzzwords just came up. And I felt okay to disclose my background and that I haven't been Christian all my life and that I am still Jewish. I'm still all these other things, and felt completely safe to do that. So I think the mysticism is a really important part of the community because, and what makes this community so special is because we have such an emphasis on mysticism, however that's expressed, we make room for each other because everyone's going to have their own unique direct experience of God. And then the last thing I'll say, I don't want to speak too long, but Justin, I feel like you have done something really special in the way that you've nurtured this community. So there are aspects in which your spirituality doesn't look like mine, but you and then the original founders or whoever, the people you first started working with, just created such a beautiful container and stewarded it so well so that rather than being a typical online group where there's maybe, whatever, 5,000 people and people get into theological fights and who knows what. That's not what happens in our community. We make space for each other. We learn from each other. We grow together and individually. And it's just something very special about this community for me.
That makes me, it warms my heart that you say that. Thank you.
Yeah, the interspiritual part I think is a really important part. because we each are very multifaceted, and as we go through things in life, like our view changes and our perspectives. Who we are now is not who we were when we were 20. And different things have influenced us over time. And yet at some point there's this deep longing. And in many of us in the community, we have um, been brought up in some sort of faith tradition and then realize that it's we want more nuance and more depth than what's presented in front of us. And that's not always a safe thing to explore in those faith communities. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes we're searching for something deeper. And when I pick readings, I lead once a month. I will look for um, contemporary or classical mystics. I will look for poems. I will look for readings from other faith traditions. Um, and but whatever readings I pull together, they all kind of point to a similar theme coming at it from different angles, different faith traditions, different times. And somehow they all kind of inform each other. And then they're kind of a launching point for like, here's this particular topic, let's dive deep. And then because we are kind of a diverse group that has the mystical bent, the contemplative bent, we then can, it's such a deep and rich conversation. Um, and I grew up Lutheran and have dabbled around. When I say dabbled, I've explored Hindu, I've explored Buddhist tradition things. I've explored from wherever I can find it. I feel like I'm a spiritual sponge. And yet I keep circling around, deepening the lens of Christianity through that. Um, and sometimes we have an opportunity to do that within a traditional church, but oftentimes not. It's a worship service, maybe a Bible study, but to get the kind of depth that we have in the chapel is kind of rare. Um, Justin, you talked about going to seminary. I've thought about going to seminary, but I also know that where I'm at spiritually, I'm not going to fit neatly into any particular denomination. And I would be fringe in my beliefs, and I would probably have to toe the line pretty closely-ish. And that's why I decided to become a spiritual director instead, is because then I can work with people who want to take that deep dive, right? And because in this day of the nones, the NONES, um, people are leaving church and looking for something more. And that something more is here in this space with us. And we need all as much of it as we can get these days. There's a lot of people out there who are really uh, searching and longing for something more than superficial, more than what's just day-to-day lives.
Pick up on your point there, Julie. I find myself thinking of Thoreau's quote, which I'm going to requote slightly, and say that the mass of people lead lives of quiet desperation. We are in an age where any common sense of meaning has been eroded, where human beings are increasingly seen as machines. We produce, we consume, we reproduce, we die. And people are from many, many different perspectives, are coming to the place of saying, well, there must be more to life than this. And I come from a place where, from my earliest years, even before I named Christianity or God or found any solace in the religious tradition, I knew that there was something more to life than merely the round of production, consumption, and death. And we are made for far more. We are made of stardust. As a friend of mine said at a recent Ash Wednesday service, not only are we dust and we return to dust, but we are stardust and we return to stardust. We are made of the stuff of the universe in all its richness and wonder and glory. And what I want to bring to the chapel is a sense of the other, whether that's the other world and Celtic sense of the thin place and the tales of the ancient bards, or a more modern poet, because I am a poet myself. I see myself in that heritage, in that. And I believe with Shelley that poets are the unacknowledged legislators, and that spirituality at its root is poetry. Now, I mean, there's many great works of prose that are written and speak of mysticism, but at its heart, poetry and mysticism are the two things that go really, really closely together. And it is poetry as mysticism, particularly if I want to name check people, the metaphysical poets, John Donne, George Herbert, John Milton, hugely mystical, at the same time as being very theological. William Blake, of course, who I regard as my master and my mentor poetically. And the Romantic poets, of course, because they're always looking for something larger than life. So what I try to bring to chapel is that sense of larger than life, of the eternal, and of us being both matter and spirit, so that Jesus becomes not the savior on a pedestal whose death somehow persuades an angry God to let us into heaven, but rather he is what we are all in our essence. Jesus, I believe, is the way that shows us how to live that human divine life, and that as we embrace death as he did, we come then through to resurrection. And we do that in community because we can't do it on our own. And wherever each one of us is on the journey, again, community, finding your place in the community is how we grow and become more like that divine self that we are inherently made to be. And that's what keeps me, in the chapel. And that's what I hope I can bring to the chapel. And I do bring to the chapel.
Well, that's really beautiful. Thank you, Phil.
And I think that's that sense of Jesus being the way is that his life shows us the way of death, tomb time, and resurrection. And those things, you can look at them as finality, like this is what happened in Jesus in the gospel. But if you look at it, that's actually a roadmap for us on a daily basis. We are going through little deaths all the time, whether it's disappointments, whether it's big changes in our lives, death of loved ones, diagnoses, loss of job, down to, like I said, little disappointments or when things don't work our way. So all of these little deaths, we have to go through a kind of a tomb time while we readjust and come to a new understanding. And then from there, we are resurrected into a new space, kind of a new stance. And I think that is one of the words that I really like is a stance. And so as we're going through all these, and especially together as a community, um, we have this stance of um, there's divine light inside of each of us. Sometimes we can barely find it. Sometimes it needs to be kindled. Sometimes it's blazing bright. And each of us in our own unique way. But in those times where we can barely find it, we're here together. And if we find ourselves in that kind of tomb time or wilderness time, um, there's others around to support us. And we also have a roadmap of what that looks like. And we can then circle back with each other and come to a new understanding in the way of life that's a deeper and more connected stance.
I'm really glad you said that, Julie, and I will tell you that this is actually what you said when you talked about Jesus being the way through death, tomb time, and resurrection is exactly the theme of a book that I'm writing at the moment called The Jesus Way, which is basically on that same topic. But going beyond it, I think you see that Jesus tells us this way. That's his manifesto. And that's what the Beatitudes are all about. So what I'm working on is actually marrying up your Jesus, your vision of Jesus being the way with death, tomb time, and resurrection, with how he expects us to do it and the qualities that he wants to cultivate within us, which are the qualities expressed in the Beatitudes, which, if you'd like, are the Jesus manifesto. You know, if he was going out for election or something, that is what his, you know, that is what he would put as qualities. You know, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the peacemakers. And those are the qualities which he instills in us through the Holy Spirit, and which we can, and this is one of the gifts, incidentally, of Celtic Church, particularly the Irish penitentials, which Justin knows far more about than I do, but they actually provide practices by which we can get into those kind of virtues. And so, yes, we are a people of the way. And if you're looking for a faith that is not just look at Jesus on the cross, look what he's done, believe in that and you're okay. If that doesn't satisfy, if you want a hunger for discipleship, like is expressed in the Bible when Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me, come to us. This is a place where you can learn something about what that discipleship can look like and what the experience is like for each one of us where we are on the road.
So there's a million things I want to say about all of those things. I'm also mindful of the time and wondering, I know Julie said had to go at the hour. Do you still have a few minutes?
Yeah, I still have a few minutes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to try and weave together all of the things that were coming up as you guys were speaking. And one of them, Julie, was the idea of the stance, which for me is a really important kind of concept, that we have this stance that we take to life, and it's like the default, like if you think in martial arts. I get this from John Vervaeke and the cognitive science kind of thing, but I love this metaphor of, like, in martial arts, I can't do it right because I'm not a karate guy, but like they have this kind of stance that they do that is not actually practical for anything other than to be a well-balanced, well-rounded place from which to do a number of other things, and a good place to start from, and a good place to come back to in between various things that you're doing. And I think it's really a good idea to to think about our spiritual stance, like what it's going to change in the moment. Sometimes we need to be like this, sometimes we need to be like that, sometimes we need to be very methodical and left right brained. I get those mixed up. Sometimes you need to be an artist, whatever, but to have this sort of stance that we come back to. And I think maybe we share some kind of common stance in the chapel that, like, and that's what makes it flourish. I don't know if that's making sense, but it's just a feeling I had. And yeah, I think that stance has something to do with poetry and what Phil was saying. And for a while, I've been trying to think about how I can make all of my theology more poetic and make all of my poetry more theological, so that I can learn to do the two together just as one. I've been reading the hymns of Saint Ephrem this year, and if we're name dropping good books to read, and of the church fathers, Saint Ephrem is just this remarkable poet, hymn writer, and the symbolism, and it's just so beautiful, and it's packed with theology that I just love. Like, you can sit with a few verses of this poetry and be like, wow, now that's a whole different view on Adam and Eve that I never even thought about. Like, this is really fun. But it's also poetic, and that's what makes it so rich. Like, that you can, sometimes I buy modern theologians books because I want to learn more about, the history of Maximus the Confessor or something like that, and I try and grudge through these academic books, and they're so dry, and I wish that they could just condense it down into a poem. And I feel like I'm rambling now, but I think there's something in our communal stance that's poetic, and maybe there's, Rebecca keeps nodding, so I'm curious what she has to say. But
I mean, I guess I just agree, and others have touched on it in various ways, but maybe going back to what you were talking about, Julie, with the chapel readings, because I think you mentioned that somebody mentioned that they bring poetry. I think it was you. And you bring different perspectives to a theme. I also feel like there's something poetic in the big sense about the chapel. So chapel leaders do bring poetry. I do sometimes when I lead. But there's something even bigger than that. And the thing about poetry is that it makes room for different experiences of the poem, different ways of expressing the truth of the poem, different layers of meaning. And I feel like this is why we all feel so safe in the chapel, is there's room for all of those different expressions, those different layers of meaning, those different interpretations of the same basic truth. But maybe we express it differently, or interpret it using different language, etc. And to me, that's very poetic. And I'll also share that. So my journey has been, I don't know, a little bit atypical, in the sense that Jews don't typically become Christian, and so I've always been a little bit of an oddball, but part of and I'm still very much connected to my Jewish upbringing, so it's not in any way a rejection. But one of the things that attracted me so much about the Christian story and framework is that there are so many levels of meaning and so many different ways to approach and interpret and experience and live out the symbols, and the stories. What is the meaning of Jesus, the cosmic Christ, the real Jesus, etc. And that is, to me, I mean, that's God, right? Like, God is not one thing. God is so many different things. And I've always looked for spaces where I could feel free to express and engage with all of those different layers and perspectives on this essential kind of Christian truth. And I feel that the chapel makes space for this. And so, and even when I lead, I often bring a Jewish reading along with, I typically do bring a Christian reading. Sometimes I bring a poem that's not necessarily associated with a particular religious tradition. And it's like a prism, you look from all these different angles and you get to a bigger truth than any one of them can offer. And I feel like that is what the chapel is for me.
Yeah,
So
because
that's
what we're
poetry in the big sense. Sorry, go ahead,
yeah, oh
Linda.
no, that's exactly right because we're trying to what we have the longing for is exploring the ineffable, right? You can't you can't actually articulate the full ineffable. So we have to come in sideways. And poetry allows us to come in sideways. Art allows us to come in sideways. Coming from different mystics and different faith traditions and different commentaries or quotes or whatever it is, even the way we discuss, right? That is all coming in sideways because we all have different perspectives on things. And together it forms a bigger sense of knowing and unknowing, right? We're not afraid of unknowing here. And there's a sense of, I mean, it's not only community, right? Because we've been talking about that a bunch. Um, but there's almost a creative or co-creative aspect of our discussions that it's like we're creating that understanding together. And it's also with compassion and it's a lot of curiosity and a lot of empathy and openness and inclusion. I mean, our table is huge, right? We welcome people to the table, people who want to be at a table, a faith community. Because we can't do it alone. I mean, it gets lonely being on the fringe or being not quite satisfied with the status quo, right? And so when you can do that with others, it really does make all the difference. But having that, again, open, expansive, curious, it's like we're explorers and co-creators. And I mean, I don't have an inside uh, track on what God thinks, but isn't that what we're supposed to be doing as part of creation, right? Is living out who we fully are and expressing who we fully are. Um, Rebecca, you wouldn't be the person that you are without the background that you have. And you have important things to say. And that goes for everybody that we encounter in the group. And those perspectives, when taken together, uh, show the fullness of creation, show the fullness of creation.
Yeah, there was two things you said there that stirred something in me. One was the co-creation, and then the other was the sense of coming to understanding together in a way. I can't remember exactly how you worded it at the beginning, but getting at that sense of what the spirit is that comes between us that is more and flows. I feel it, if I can be honest. I feel, and even right now, although also in other times when we do our chapel and stuff, that there's a spiritual perspective that shifts and there's a flow I can feel between all of us.
Mhm.
And it made me think of the Celtic, the Welsh, particularly idea of Awen. Um, and if we're talking about the poetic spirit, when you read the Welsh bards and the way they describe Awen, Awen means inspiration. You could translate it directly as inspiration. Um, Poetic inspiration in particular, and the bards would speak of the way that Awen comes to them, in all these sort of very poetic languages. It's a rushing wave, it's a blowing wind, and the Awen showed me this, and they'll say the Awen taught me that. Um, and I feel like there's something about the spirit of poetry. I've been trying to do more meter and rhyme poetry, which I know isn't the popular thing with poetry today, but I like it. I think there's something spiritual about meter and rhyme, and certainly the Welsh and Irish bards were all about making sure that their texts are like, do not we deviate from this pattern of meter and rhyme. And in the one hand, it feels restrictive because then you can't say the thing you want to say because it doesn't fit. And you're like, I have this beautiful phrase and I can't put it in my poem. And that sucks and it's frustrating. So I get why people don't want to do it. But there's something about it becomes a co-creative act when you have that limitation that you can't just decide what's going to be in this poem. The poem has to tell you to a certain extent what's going to be in the poem. And I don't know, when I write in meter and rhyme, especially, like when I write anything, I don't know what it's going to be till the end. But especially when I'm writing in meter and rhyme, I have to let go of the idea that this is what my poem's going to say, because it's going to say what it's going to say when it comes out at the end and it all flows. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense or not, but I feel like there's something about that co-creative act. Not that you guys are a limiting factor, because you're not at all. You're an expanding factor in my spirituality. But there's something about that co-creative spirit of poetry. I had no idea what we were going to talk about when we came onto this call today. And there's no way I could have guessed that this is where it would have gone, but it feels right somehow that the Awen is there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find that with
Yeah.
the ceramics that I co-create with the clay,
Mhm.
and the clay has an opinion, and the universe has an opinion, and I have an opinion, and somehow when it comes together, it's more beautiful and also different than the vision I went in with. And you're right, that's exactly what we're doing right now. And so we're co-creating this conversation and co-creating the space among us. And that's what happens when we meet every time.
In words of John
Yeah.
O'Donoghue, we bless the space among us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to come back to poetry, it's not only the words, it's the space between the words and its relation between the words. And this is why I agree with Justin about, writing in meter. I have been writing in meter more as well. Some work Justin and I have done. It's been very much down that line, and it's been a good discipline for me, because my own writing tends to be much more free form, and that has its own mystical element as well. If you read, for example, another poet who's been very influential, particularly recently for me, is W.B. Yeats. Now, of course, coming out of the Irish and the Celtic mythical tradition, but dragging a whole lot of mysticism into his work as well. He is hugely influential, because mystical is both grounded. We are rooted in our tradition, and that's a good thing. And it's why I like my church and its liturgies as a grounding. But we're grounded like a tree, so that we have good roots that are solid, that are firm, that draw up nutrition. But a tree has branches and leaves and spreads out around. And that is where the free flow of mystical energy goes, is into those. Without the roots, you can't have branches. And without the branches, you can't have the leaves, you can't have the blossom, you can't have the beauty. So we are, again, it's this divine human thing, but we need both the structure, the roots, but we need the imagination to build those branches and those leaves, and to put out beauty, because beauty is what is so lacking in the world today. I think it was Dostoevsky who said that the world will be saved through beauty, and it's something that I think that and beauty is not just in art or in poetry, but it is in the community. It's in the love that we show one another, the respect that we show one another for each other's journeys. Just by being that listening presence, we beautify one another and honor the journey and honor the process.
Well, if this was a chapel session, which essentially it is, just without readings, at this point, I would say we've come up close to our time, and I would ask if anyone had anything left on their heart that they wanted to share before we sign off and everything. Is there anything someone feels inclined to add?
I'm just going to throw in a real quick quote from T.S. Eliot, because I think it's really appropriate. And the end of all, and this is from one of the four quartets, which I can never remember which one, but anyway. And the end of all our exploring will be to
I swear every time your video skips, it's on some like really important sentence. You'll be like, the eternity of God. And then it like froze earlier. And here we didn't catch the punchline. You got to say it again.
And the end of all our exploring will be to know the place and know it for the first time.
Well, perhaps that's a good place to end or begin or whatever the case may be. So thank you all so much for doing this with me. It's a wonderful way to spend my Sunday afternoon. And I'm sure I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Justin, and blessings all. Have a good week.